Hey everybody, this is video 2 of chapter 2 of part 3 of Adorno's negative dialectics. Part 3 is titled Models. Chapter 2 of part 3 is titled World, Spirit, and Natural History, an Excursion to Hegel. And the sections that will be covered in this video are spirit as a social totality, and historical reason antagonistic. Spirit as a social totality. To experience that objectivity which ranks ahead of the individual and the individual's consciousness is to experience the unity of a totally socialized society. Its closest kin in the sense of tolerating nothing outside it is the philosophical ideal of absolute identity. However fraudulently the promotion of unity to a philosophy may have exalted it at the expense of plurality, its supremacy, though not the summum bonum, a victorious philosophical tradition since the Eleatics took it for, is an ens realissimum. It really has a touch of the transcendence, which the philosophers praise in the idea of unity. While the unfolded bourgeois society and the very earliest Unitarian thinking was already urban, rudimentary bourgeois, was made up of countless individual spontaneities of self-preserving individuals, dependent on each other for self-preservation. Unity in the individuals were by no means in the balance claimed for them by justifying theorems. The non-identity of unity and plurality does, however, have the form that the one takes precedence as the identity of the system, which leaves nothing at large. Without individual spontaneities, unity would not have come into being, and as their synthesis it was secondary. Nominalism was a reminder of this. Yet as unity, whether through the needs of the self-preservation of many, or merely due to irrational states of dominion, abused as a pretext by the many, came to be more and more tightly woven. All individuals were caught up in unity on pain of destruction. They were, quote, integrated in it, to use Spencer's term, absorbed in its legality even against their own better insight into their individual interest. Gradually, then, this ended the progressive differentiation of which Spencer could still dream that it necessarily accompanies integration, while the one and the whole takes shape in unchanged fashion, solely due to the particularities it covers. It is taking shape in ruthless disregard of those particularities. What is realized by means of individuality and plurality is the cause of the many, and again it is not their cause. They have less and less control over it. Their totality is their otherness at the same time. This is the dialectic carefully ignored by the Hegelian one. Insofar as the individuals are at all aware of taking a back seat to unity, its priority reflects to them the being in itself of the universal, which they encounter in fact. It is inflicted upon them all the way into their inmost core, even when they inflict it on themselves. The line, some phrase in Greek, that the character of men, as such always molded by the universal, is their fate, has more truth to it than the truth of a characterological determinism. The universal of which every individual is determined at will, as one of his particular kind, that universal is barred from what is extraneous, and therefore is heteronymous to the individual, as anything once said to have been ordained for him by demons. The truth of the idea's being in itself is so powerful because it is the truth, but it is the negative truth What makes it ideology is its affirmative reversal. Once men have learned from the preponderance to the universal. Let me repeat that whole sentence. The ideology of the idea's being in itself is so powerful because it is the truth, but it is the negative truth that makes it ideology, is its affirmative reversal. Once men have learned about the preponderance of the universal, it is all but inescapable for them to transfigure it into a spirit as the higher being which they must propitiate. Coercion acquires meaning for them, and not without all reason, for the abstract universal of the whole, which applies the coercion, is akin to the universality of thought, the spirit. And this in turn permits the spirit in its carrier to be projected on that universality as if it were realized therein, as if it had its own reality for itself. In the spirit, the unanimity of the universal has become a subject, and in society, universality is maintained only through the medium of the spirit, through the abstracting operation which it performs in complete reality. Both acts converge and barter, in something subjectively thought and at the same time objectively valid, in which the objectivity of the universal and the concrete definition of the individual subjects oppose each other, unreconciled precisely by coming to be commensurable. In the name, quote, world spirit, and quote, the spirit is affirmed and hypostatized only as that which it always was in itself. Durkheim, who was charged with metaphysics for that reason, recognized that what society worships in the world spirit is itself the omnipotence of its own coercion. Society may find itself confirmed by the world spirit because it actually has all the attributes which it precedes then to worship in the spirit. The mythical adoration of the spirit is not pure conceptual mythology. It is the tender of thanks for the fact that, in history's more highly developed phases, all individuals have been living only by means of that social unit which the individuals did not exhaust, and whose prolongation takes them only closer to their doom. If today, without noticing it, they are literally granted their existence subject to annulment by the great monopolies and powers, this brings out only what has always been teleologically inherent in the emphatic concept of society. Ideology hypostasizes the world spirit because potentially it was already hypostatized. The cult of its categories, however, of the utterly formal ones of greatness, for example, which even Nietzsche accepted, this cult reinforces only the consciousness of the spirit's difference from everything individual, as if it were an ontological difference. It thus reinforces antagonism and the foreseeable calamity. New section, historical reason antagonistic. It is only now that compared with potential reason, with the total interest of the associating individual subjects, it differs from the reason of the world spirit is unreason. Like all his disciples, Hegel had been chided for equating logical categories with social categories, and some from the philosophy of history. This was chalked up as some phrase in Greek, as that point of speculative idealism which had to break off in the face of the unconstruability of experience. Yet this very construction was doing Like all his disciples, Hegel was chided for equating logical categories with social ones, and some from the philosophy of history. This was chalked up as some phrase in Greek, as that point of speculative idealism which had to break off in the face of the unconstruability of experience. Yet this very construction was doing justice to reality. The tit-for-tat of history, as well as the totality-bound principle of equivalence in the social relation between individual subjects, both proceed according to the logicity, which Hegel is said merely to interpret into them, except with his logicity, the primacy of the universal and the dialectic of universal in particular is an index falsi. That identity exists no more than do freedom, individuality, and whatever Hegel identifies with the universal. The totality of the universal expresses its own failure. What tolerates nothing particular is thus revealing itself as particularly dominant. The general reason for that comes to prevail. The general reason that comes to prevail is already a restricted reason. It is not just unity within diversity, but as an attitude to reality it is imposed, a unity over something, and thus as a matter of pure form, it is antagonistic in itself. Unity is division. The irrationality of the particularly realized ratio within the social totality is not extraneous to the ratio, not solely due to its application, rather it is immanent to it. Measured by complete reason, the prevailing one unveils itself as being polarized, and thus irrational even in itself, according to its principle. Enlightenment is truly subject to dialectics. There is a dialectic taking place in its own concept. Ratio is no more to be hypostatized than any other category. The transfer of the self-preserving interest from the individuals to the species is spiritually coagulated with the form of the ratio, a form that is general and antagonistic at the same time. The transfer obeys a logic which the major bourgeois philosophy preceded at such historic corners as Hobbes and Kant. Without ceding the self-preserving interest to the species, in bourgeois thinking represented mostly by the state, the individual would be unable to preserve himself in more highly developed social conditions. This transfer is necessary for the individuals, all but inevitably, however, it puts the general rationality at odds with the particular human beings whom it must negate to become general, and whom it pretends, and not only pretends, to serve. The universality of the ratio ratifies the needfulness of everything particular, its dependency upon the whole, and what unfolds in that universality, due to the process of abstraction on which it rests, is its contradiction to the particular. All governing reason, in installing itself above something else, necessarily constricts itself. The principle of absolute identity is self-contradictory. It perpetuates non-identity in suppressed and damaged form. A trace of this entered into Hegel's effort to have non-identity absorbed by the philosophy of identity, indeed to define identity by non-identity. Yet Hegel is distorting the state of facts by affirming identity, admitting non-identity as a negative, albeit a necessary one, and misconceiving the negativity of the universal. He lacks sympathy with the utopian particular that has been buried underneath the universal, with the non-identity which would not come into being until realized reason has left the particular reason of the universal behind. The sense of the wrong implied by the concept of the universal, a sense which Hegel chides, would deserve his respect because of the universality of the wrong itself. When Franz von Sickingen, a condottiere at the outset of the modern age, lay mortally wounded and found the words, quote, not sans cause, quote, for his fate, he was expressing two things with the vigor of that age: the necessity of the social course of the world, which condemned him to perish, and the negativity of the principle of a course of the world in line with that necessity. With happiness, even of the whole, the principle is downright incompatible. The empirical content of that dictum is more than the platitude that the causal theorem is generally valid. In that which happens to the individual person, the universal interdependence dawns upon that person's consciousness. Its seemingly isolated fate reflects the whole. What the mythological name of fate used to stand for is no less mythical when it has been demythologized into a secular, quote, logic of things, unquote. It is burned into the individual as the figure of his particularization. Objectively, this motivated Hegel's construction of the world spirit. On the one hand, it accounts for the emancipation of the subject. The subject must have stepped back from universality in order to perceive it in and for itself. On the other hand, the context of social individual acts must have been woven into a totality so continuous, so predetermining for the individual, as it had never been in the feudal age. And that is the end of video 2 of chapter 2 of part 3 of Adorno's negative dialectics. Part 3 is titled Models, and chapter 2 of part 3 is titled World Spirit and Natural History, an Excursion to Hegel. Thank you so much for listening.